Have you ever noticed how certain women trigger something in people just by existing? Not by what they say or do, but simply by their refusal to need anyone. The world calls them cold, unavailable, too independent. But what if that judgment is actually a projection? What if the woman who lives alone without a man isn't the one with the problem? She's not broken, she's just done pretending. There's something Carl Gustav Jung understood that most people still can't accept. The parts of ourselves we refuse to integrate don't disappear, they become our shadow. And the woman who chooses solitude isn't running from connection. She's confronting the shadow that everyone else is desperately avoiding. The shadow that whispers, what if you don't actually need to be half of something to be whole? That question terrifies people, because if one woman can be complete without a partner, it exposes the lie that millions are still living, the lie that says your worth is measured by who wants you, that your existence only matters if someone validates it, that being alone means being less than. But she stopped believing that lie the moment she realized it was killing her. This woman isn't cold, she's selective in a way that makes people uncomfortable. She doesn't mistake attention for love anymore. She doesn't confuse availability with presence. She's learned to read the difference between someone who wants to know her and someone who just wants to consume her. And that discernment, that ability to see clearly through the fog of social conditioning came at a price. She paid for it with every relationship that diminished her, every connection that demanded she shrink, every partnership where she had to edit her truth to keep the peace, until one day the cost became too high and she walked away. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but with the quiet certainty of someone who's finally stopped lying to herself. Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole. But here's what the self-help books won't tell you. Individuation isn't comfortable. It doesn't come with affirmations and vision boards. It comes through confrontation with everything you've been avoiding. The woman who lives alone has descended into that confrontation, and what she found there changed her forever. So when you see her and feel that strange discomfort, that urge to label her as damaged or difficult, pause, because what you're actually witnessing is someone who's done the psychological work most people spend their entire lives avoiding. And that mirror she's holding up, it's not about her, it's about you. She didn't start here. That's what people don't understand. The woman who lives alone now was once the woman who gave everything, who loved harder than anyone should, who bent herself into shapes that had nothing to do with her actual form, just to fit into someone else's idea of acceptable. She was the good daughter, the accommodating girlfriend, the woman who said yes when she meant no, because she'd been taught that her needs were negotiable. She performed femininity the way society demanded, soft enough to be non-threatening, available enough to be valued, malleable enough to be loved. Carl Jung spent decades studying what happens when we live behind a persona, the mask we show the world to gain acceptance, and this woman wore that mask so well that she forgot her own face underneath. She became an expert at reading rooms, anticipating needs, managing emotions that weren't even hers. The psychic cost of this performance, she slowly erased herself. But the unconscious doesn't tolerate lies forever. It started small, a tightness in her chest when she said "I'm fine," a flash of rage when someone took her availability for granted, dreams where she was screaming but no sound came out. Jung would recognize these symptoms immediately, the shadow beginning to rebel. All those rejected parts of herself, the anger, the boundaries, the raw authenticity, were no longer willing to stay buried. Then came the relationships that broke her. Not broke her heart, broke her open. The man who loved her potential but resented her reality. The partner who wanted a muse, not a person. The connection where she had to dim her light so he could feel bright. Each one taught her the same devastating lesson. You can lose yourself trying to be loved. And she did lose herself, completely. There was a moment, maybe you know this moment, where she looked in the mirror and didn't recognize who was staring back. Not because she'd aged or changed externally, but because the woman in the reflection was a stranger, a carefully constructed performance, a people-pleasing ghost. Jung called this the dark night of the soul, the moment when your entire identity collapses and you're forced to confront the terrifying question, if I'm not who I've been pretending to be, then who am I? This is where most people turn back. They rebuild the persona quickly, find another relationship to hide in, distract themselves with anything to avoid that void. But she didn't. She sat in that emptiness, she let it consume her. And in that consumption, something unexpected happened. She stopped trying to be saved. Not because she didn't need support, not because she became some superhuman island, but because she finally understood that no one was coming to rescue her from herself. The work of integration, of gathering all her fragmented pieces and learning to hold them, was hers alone. So she began the descent into her childhood wounds, into the inherited patterns from her mother and grandmother, into every moment she'd abandoned herself to keep someone else comfortable. It was archaeological work, excavating layers of conditioning, trauma, and self-betrayal. And it was brutal. But here's what Jung knew that our culture doesn't teach. You can't become whole by only accepting the light. You have to turn toward the shadow. You have to face the parts of yourself you've been told are unacceptable. The rage, the selfishness, the refusal, the darkness. Not to become those things, but to integrate them. To stop projecting them onto others and own them as part of your complexity. This woman did that work, in the solitude, in the silence, in the painful, unglamorous process of meeting herself fully for the first time. And when she finally emerged, she wasn't the same woman who went in. When she emerged from that descent, something fundamental had shifted. Not her capacity to love, not her desire for connection, but her willingness to betray herself for either. Jung called this psychological rebirth individuation, but it's not what the self-help industry sold you. It's not about becoming your best self or living your truth. It's about becoming uncomfortably real. And reality, as she discovered, doesn't need anyone's permission. She stopped explaining herself. That was the first sign. Where she once offered lengthy justifications for her choices, why she turned down dates, why she preferred solitude, why she wasn't interested, she now simply stated her truth and let it stand. No thank you became a complete sentence. The compulsion to soften her boundaries with explanations died the moment she realized, people who respect you don't require a thesis defense for your needs. Her energy shifted. People could feel it even if they couldn't name it. She no longer entered rooms trying to make everyone comfortable. She no longer managed other people's emotions while neglecting her own. The anxious scanning, am I too much, not enough, do they like me, had been replaced by something steadier, a groundedness that came from finally knowing who she was when no one was watching. This is what Jung meant by the integrated personality. She'd stopped projecting her unlived life onto potential partners. She'd stopped seeking completion through someone else's gaze. The animus, that inner masculine energy, had been activated within her. She no longer needed a man to embody strength, decisiveness, or authority. She'd claimed those qualities for herself. And that reclamation changed everything. Suddenly, the men who once fascinated her, the unavailable ones, the projects, the ones who needed fixing, lost their appeal entirely. Because she could see now what she'd been doing. She'd been attracted to their woundedness because it mirrored her own unintegrated shadow. Every broken man she tried to save was actually her disowned self crying out for attention. But she'd done the work of self-rescue. And once you've saved yourself, you stop being attracted to people who need saving. Her standards didn't become impossible. They became non-negotiable. There's a difference. She wasn't looking for perfection. She was looking for consciousness. For someone who'd done their own shadow work, who could hold tension without collapsing into blame, who understood that love isn't about completion but about two whole people choosing to expand together. And if that person didn't exist in her immediate orbit, she'd rather be alone than pretend half consciousness was enough. This is where she becomes dangerous to the system. Because a woman who knows her worth, not in some abstract affirmation-chanting way, but in the bone-deep certainty that comes from having walked through hell and chosen herself, cannot be controlled. She can't be manipulated by guilt. She won't accept crumbs and call them a feast. She sees through performance, spots emotional unavailability from miles away, and has zero interest in auditioning for love. She's not playing hard to get. She's genuinely hard to get. Because getting her requires meeting her where she actually is, in depth, in truth, in full presence. And most people can't even meet themselves there yet. Jung warned about this. He said the psychological development of the individual is often perceived as hostile by the collective, because her very existence asks an uncomfortable question of everyone still performing. What if you stopped pretending too? What would you have to face? That question is why she makes people so uneasy. She's not doing anything to them, she's simply being. But her being exposes their avoiding, and no one likes having their defenses illuminated. So they call her cold, difficult, too independent, too picky, as if her standards for her own life require anyone else's approval. But she's learned something they haven't. The judgment of those who haven't done the work is just noise, and she no longer adjusts her frequency to make others comfortable. There's a reason this woman triggers such visceral reactions, and it has nothing to do with her personality. Carl Jung discovered something that still makes people uncomfortable. We don't actually see others clearly, we see our own unconscious projected onto them. And when you encounter a woman who has integrated her shadow, who lives without the need for external validation, you're not reacting to her. You're reacting to everything in yourself that you've refused to face. She becomes a mirror, and mirrors don't lie. Men who've built their identity around being needed feel fundamentally threatened. Because if she doesn't need rescuing, doesn't need providing for, doesn't need their validation to feel whole, what's their purpose? The unconscious panic sets in. If women don't need us, what are we? But that's not her question to answer. That's the work they've been avoiding. Women still trapped in the performance feel judged by her mere existence. They look at her freedom and feel the weight of their own compromises. Every time they silence themselves to keep the peace, every boundary they don't set, every dream they've shelved to be acceptable, she represents the road not taken, and that creates a rage that has nowhere to go except toward her. She didn't ask to be a symbol, but psychological sovereignty always threatens those still living in chains. Jung would say she's activated the collective shadow. She represents what the culture has repressed, the possibility that a woman's worth isn't determined by her relationship status, that completion doesn't require coupling, that solitude isn't a waiting room for the real life to begin, it is the real life. And this terrifies a system built on codependency. Think about it. How much of our economy depends on women feeling incomplete? The beauty industry, the wedding industry, the self-help industry promising you'll be lovable once you fix yourself enough. The entire machinery of consumer culture runs on manufactured lack, and she's standing in the middle of it saying, I don't lack anything. That's not just personal freedom, that's economic heresy. But the threat goes deeper than commerce. It strikes at something archetypal. For millennia, women's power was contained through relationship. You were daughter, then wife, then mother. Your identity was always in relation to someone else. Even your name changed to reflect whose property you were. The woman who stands outside this structure, who names herself, who belongs to herself, she's tapping into an ancient fear. She's the witch, the spinster, the woman at the edge of the village who answers to no one. History tried to burn women like this, lock them away, shame them into submission. But she's still here, and she's not alone anymore. Jung spoke of the emerging archetype, new patterns of being that arise when collective consciousness shifts, and we're witnessing one now. The woman who chooses herself first isn't an aberration. She's a harbinger. She's the future pushing through the cracks of an old dying paradigm. And that paradigm is fighting back with everything it has. The judgment, the concern trolling, the warnings that she'll end up alone, the narrative that her standards are too high, her boundaries too rigid, her independence too extreme. But she knows what they don't. She'd rather face the fear of being alone than the certainty of losing herself again, because she's already been through that death. She's already experienced the slow erosion of self that comes from chronic self-abandonment, and nothing, absolutely nothing, is worth going back to that. This is what Jung meant by the differentiated individual. She's separated from the collective's demands. She's no longer unconsciously living out cultural scripts. She's claimed her psychological autonomy, and in doing so she's become immune to the mechanisms that once controlled her. Guilt doesn't work anymore. She won't shrink to make others comfortable. Shame doesn't land. She's faced her shadow and found it wasn't monstrous, just human. Fear of abandonment doesn't dictate her choices. She's learned to hold herself. This makes her unpredictable, unmanageable, impossible to guilt-trip, manipulate, or coerce. And to a world that depends on women's compliance, that is the ultimate threat. But here's the paradox Jung understood. The very thing that makes her threatening is also what makes her most capable of real intimacy, because she's no longer seeking someone to complete her. She's no longer projecting her unlived life onto a partner. She's no longer using relationship as an escape from herself. When she finally chooses connection, if she chooses it, it won't be from need. It will be from overflow, from the desire to share a fullness rather than fill an emptiness. And that kind of love, born from two individuated people, is so rare, it's almost mythical. But you can't access it until you've walked through what she's walked through, until you've faced the void and discovered you can survive it, until you've integrated your shadow and stopped needing the world's approval to exist. That journey is what makes her dangerous and what makes her free. She's not the same woman anymore. That's what people don't understand when they try to relate to her through old frameworks. They remember who she was before, the accommodating one, the woman who laughed at jokes that weren't funny, who said yes when her body screamed no, who twisted herself into emotional pretzels, trying to make broken relationships work. They expect her to still be that person, just slightly evolved. But that woman doesn't exist anymore. Jung was clear about this. Psychological transformation isn't addition, it's transmutation. The alchemists understood it. You don't just add gold to lead, you fundamentally change the substance itself. She didn't become a better version of who she was. She became someone entirely different, someone forged in the fire of her own breakdown and reconstruction. Her intuition is no longer a whisper she ignores. It's a roar she trusts absolutely. Where she once questioned every instinct. Am I being too sensitive? Too demanding? Too much? She now knows her body's intelligence is more reliable than any external opinion. When something feels wrong, she doesn't need 3 friends, 2 therapists, and a tarot reading to confirm it. She feels it, she honors it, she acts on it. This isn't the pseudo-intuition of projection. It's not the anxious scanning born from hypervigilance. It's the deep knowing that comes from finally being aligned with yourself. When you stop abandoning yourself, your system recalibrates. You can feel truth in your bones. She can spot emotional unavailability in the first conversation now, not because she's cynical, because she's conscious. The man who talks about his ex for 40 minutes straight, she sees it, unprocessed grief, using her as an audience. The one who comes on intensely, then disappears, she recognizes it, avoidant attachment wrapped in romantic packaging. The one who says he wants something real but can't define what that means. She knows he wants the feeling without the work. None of this makes her bitter, it makes her discerning, and there's a universe of difference between the two. Jung spoke of the developed inferior function, the psychological capacity that comes online only after serious inner work. For her, it's the masculine function of discrimination, not the kind that excludes, but the kind that sees clearly. She's no longer seduced by potential, she deals only in reality. This means she walks away faster than she used to, much faster. Not because she's unwilling to work on things, but because she can now distinguish between a relationship that's growing through difficulty and one that's just difficult. Between someone who's genuinely evolving and someone who's promising evolution to keep her hooked. Between temporary incompatibility and fundamental misalignment. She's lost her tolerance for emotional theater, for manufactured crisis, for the drama that masquerades as depth. If a man needs chaos to feel alive, she's not interested. If he mistakes intensity for intimacy, she sees through it. If he thinks love means losing himself in her or requiring her to lose herself in him, he hasn't met her yet. Because she knows what Jung knew, real love doesn't dissolve boundaries. It honors them while creating something larger than either person alone. But here's what transformed most radically: her relationship with her own darkness. She's no longer afraid of her rage, her selfishness, her capacity for coldness, her moments of not giving a damn about anyone's feelings, including her own. She's met these aspects of herself in the underworld of her psyche and discovered they're not monsters, they're protectors. Her rage was trying to tell her about boundary violations she kept accepting. Her selfishness was trying to teach her that her needs matter too. Her coldness was the freeze response of a nervous system that had been overwhelmed for too long. When she stopped pathologizing these parts of herself, when she brought them into conscious relationship, they stopped controlling her from the shadows. The shadow, once integrated, becomes a source of power. This is Jung's core teaching, and she's living proof. Now when she feels anger, she doesn't immediately apologize for it. She examines it. What boundary was crossed? What truth am I not speaking? The anger becomes information, not evidence of her being too much. When she chooses herself over someone else's comfort, she doesn't spiral into guilt. She recognizes it as self-preservation, not selfishness. The woman who couldn't say no has become the woman who says it with ease. When she pulls back from connection because she needs space, she doesn't perform availability to prove she cares. She trusts that real intimacy survives absence. that secure people don't require constant reassurance. This is the paradox of her transformation. By becoming less accommodating, she's become more genuine. By caring less about what others think, she's become more capable of real care. By refusing to perform, she's become more present. People don't know what to do with this version of her. She's simultaneously softer and harder than before, more compassionate and less tolerant, more open and more boundaried. She holds contradictions that the old, one-dimensional version of herself never could. Jung called this the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposing forces without collapsing into either extreme. And she's developed it because she had to. Because you can't integrate your shadow without learning to hold paradox. You can't become whole without accepting that you're both light and dark, both loving and savage, both generous and self-protective. She's all of it now, consciously, intentionally, without apology. And the woman who contains all of herself becomes a force that can't be diminished, manipulated, or made small again. She's done fragmenting herself to fit into other people's comfort zones. She'd rather be whole and alone than fragmented and partnered. That choice, that willingness to risk solitude rather than self-betrayal, is what completed her transformation. Not from caterpillar to butterfly, from sleep to awakening. What's emerging in her isn't new, it's ancient. Jung spent decades studying mythology, folklore, and the dreams of his patients, and he kept finding the same images appearing across cultures that had never contacted each other. The same symbols, the same figures, the same patterns. He called these recurring images archetypes, primordial blueprints embedded in the collective unconscious of humanity. And the woman who lives alone, she's not inventing a new way of being. She's channeling an archetype that's been suppressed for centuries but never fully destroyed. She is Artemis, the Greek goddess who refused marriage and roamed the wilderness with her band of nymphs, who answered to no god, who belonged to herself, who drew her bow with deadly accuracy and never apologized for her aim. Artemis wasn't waiting for Apollo or Zeus to validate her existence. She carved out her own domain and defended it fiercely. She is Kali, the Hindu goddess of destruction and transformation, who dances on corpses not from cruelty, but from understanding that death precedes rebirth, who wears a necklace of skulls representing the ego deaths required for liberation. Kali destroys what no longer serves, and that includes versions of herself she's outgrown. She is Baba Yaga, the Slavic witch who lives deep in the forest in a hut on chicken legs, who tests those who seek her wisdom, who gives knowledge to those brave enough to face her, but devours those still trapped in childish fantasy. Baba Yaga doesn't comfort, she initiates. These aren't just myths, they're psychological templates. Jung understood that archetypes aren't relics of the past. They're living energies that constellate in the psyche when certain conditions are met, and the conditions are right now. A critical mass of women has reached the threshold where the old archetypal patterns, dutiful daughter, self-sacrificing mother, accommodating wife, no longer fit. So the psyche reaches deeper, into older, wilder patterns, into the archetype of the sovereign feminine. This archetype doesn't define herself through relationship to others. She doesn't derive power from being chosen. She doesn't need external validation to know her worth. She simply is, complete, whole, self-referencing. The woman living alone today is unconsciously and sometimes consciously embodying this archetype, and it's why she feels both familiar and threatening. Familiar because this pattern lives in everyone's collective unconscious. Threatening because it challenges every power structure built on female dependence. But here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. Archetypes aren't roles we play, they're energies we integrate. The woman embodying the sovereign feminine isn't rejecting all other aspects of womanhood. She's not anti-relationship, anti-nurturing, or anti-softness. She's incorporating those qualities while refusing to be reduced to them. She can be the mother, the lover, the companion, but she's also the warrior, the hermit, the wild one. She's claiming the full spectrum of feminine expression. This is what the culture can't tolerate. It wants women compartmentalized. You can be the nurturer or the warrior, the soft one or the strong one, the available one or the independent one. But not both, never both, because a woman who contains multitudes can't be controlled by simple categories. Jung called this the union of opposites, and it's the key to individuation. She's learned to hold the tension between solitude and connection, between vulnerability and strength, between receptivity and assertion, between the need for intimacy and the need for autonomy. These aren't contradictions to be resolved, they're polarities to be integrated. And in holding them, she becomes something the modern world has forgotten how to recognize: a complete human being. Look at the stories we tell, the movies, the novels, the fairy tales. The woman's journey almost always ends with coupling, with finding her prince, with the suggestion that her life begins only when she's chosen by someone else. Even our most progressive narratives can't quite imagine a woman's wholeness existing independent of romantic partnership. But mythology remembers what culture forgets. The virgin goddesses, Artemis, Athena, Hestia, weren't virgins in the sexual sense. They were virgin in the original meaning, one in herself, whole unto themselves. They could engage with others without losing themselves in the process. Their completeness wasn't contingent on relationship. This is the archetype she's accessing. Not the maiden waiting for the prince, not the mother sacrificing for children, not the crone dismissed as irrelevant, but the woman who belongs to herself first, who knows that any connection she forms must be in addition to her wholeness, not in place of it. Jung warned that when you activate an archetype, you take on both its gifts and its dangers. The gift of the sovereign feminine is psychological freedom, unshakable self-possession, the ability to walk through life without needing anyone's permission or approval, the capacity to love from overflow rather than need. The danger is inflation, identifying so completely with independence that you wall yourself off from genuine vulnerability, using solitude as armor rather than sanctuary, becoming so self-sufficient that you forget humans are inherently relational beings. The mature expression of this archetype knows the difference. She's not independent because she's afraid of dependence. She's sovereign because she's faced her neediness and integrated it. She can ask for help without losing herself. She can be vulnerable without becoming a victim. She can love without abandoning herself. This is the razor's edge she walks, and it's why her journey is initiatory, not just inspirational. In ancient cultures, initiations required you to die to who you were and be reborn as who you're becoming. You couldn't skip the death part. You had to descend into the underworld, face the guardians at the threshold, retrieve what was stolen, and return transformed. She's done that. The woman who lives alone has completed an initiation most people never begin. She died to her people-pleasing self. She faced the terror of being unwanted. She retrieved her own soul from all the places she'd left it behind. And she returned knowing something that can't be taught, only earned. That she is enough. Not in the shallow, affirmation-chanting sense, but in the bone-deep, undeniable way that comes from having survived your own absence and found yourself waiting on the other side. This knowing changes her presence. You can feel it when she enters a room. Not the performance of confidence, the quiet certainty of someone who's walked through fire and emerged with something unburnable. Jung called this the self, the archetype of wholeness, and accessing it requires you to face everything you're not, every illusion you've believed, every false identity you've inhabited, every way you've betrayed yourself to belong. She's done that work, and now she carries the archetype that terrifies and fascinates in equal measure, the woman who needs nothing from you but will share everything if you meet her in truth. That's not a role, that's a homecoming to what she always was beneath the conditioning. And once you've come home to yourself, you can't go back to homelessness, even if the world calls it partnership. Here's the twist no one sees coming. She's not closed to love. She's finally ready for it. All that work, all that solitude, all that integration of shadow and confrontation with self, it didn't make her unavailable. It made her capable of something most people never access: real intimacy. Jung understood this paradox perfectly. He said the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But here's the part everyone misses: that transformation only happens when both substances are stable to begin with. When you're fragmented, desperate, unintegrated, you don't create alchemy, you create chaos. She's done the work of becoming stable, and that changes everything. The woman who once needed relationship to feel whole, now wants it for an entirely different reason. Not to complete her, not to validate her, not to save her from herself, but to expand into dimensions that only become available when two conscious people meet. This isn't the love she used to chase. It's not the desperate grasping, not the fantasy projection. not the codependent merger where two half people try to make a whole. It's something she couldn't have even conceived before she did the work. Sovereign love. Two people, each complete in themselves, choosing to create something larger than either could alone. Not because they need to, because they want to, not to fill a void, to overflow together. But accessing this requires both people to have faced what she's faced, and that's where the real challenge lies. She can't go back to unconscious relationship now. It would be like asking someone who's learned to see color to live in black and white again. She's tasted psychological freedom. She knows what it feels like to be whole. She understands the difference between projection and genuine perception. So when she meets someone, her entire nervous system is screening for consciousness. Not money, not status, not even chemistry. Though that matters too. She's scanning for someone who's done their work, who's faced their shadow, who knows the difference between attachment and love. And that eliminates 95% of potential partners immediately. Not because they're bad people, but because they're still unconscious, still operating from wound, still using relationship as an escape from themselves rather than an expression of themselves. She can spot it in the first conversation. The man who talks but never asks, who shares his resume but never his truth, who performs confidence but can't sit with silence, who wants her to be impressed rather than known. Or worse, the spiritually bypassing one, who's read all the books, knows all the terms, but hasn't actually integrated anything, who talks about divine masculine and sacred union while his actions reveal he just wants control with better vocabulary. She's not fooled anymore, and she won't pretend to be just to have company. This is what people mean when they say she's too picky. What they're actually saying is, why won't you accept less than you deserve? And she has an answer now. Because I know what I deserve, and I'd rather be alone than pretend I don't. Jung called this psychological differentiation, the ability to see clearly, without the distortion of your own neediness. When you're desperate, everyone looks like a potential solution. When you're whole, you can finally see people as they actually are. And what she sees, more often than not, is men still in the process she's already completed. Men still running from their shadow, still performing masculinity rather than embodying it, still looking for a woman to fix, save, or complete them. She has compassion for this. She was there once on the other side of the equation, but compassion doesn't mean accepting breadcrumbs. She can wish them well on their journey while refusing to become a character in their unfinished story. Because here's what she knows now: you can't love someone into consciousness. You can't relationship your way into wholeness. Those are solitary journeys, and until someone's walked that path themselves, any connection will just be two people acting out their unresolved patterns on each other. She's done being someone's pattern. She's done being someone's mother, therapist, muse, or mirror for their unlived life. She's done shrinking her consciousness to make someone else's unconsciousness feel less threatening. So yes, she's alone, but she's alone with her eyes wide open, waiting for someone who can meet her in truth rather than fantasy, in presence rather than projection, in wholeness rather than woundedness. And if that person never comes, she's made peace with that too. Not in a resigned, settling way, but in the deep understanding that being alone is infinitely preferable to being with someone who requires you to abandon yourself. She's been through that death already. She's not doing it again. This is the paradox that breaks people's brains. The more whole she becomes, the more capable she is of love, and the less willing she is to accept anything less than real love. She's not playing games, she's not testing, she's not making anyone jump through hoops. She's simply operating from a standard that comes from having finally met herself. And once you've experienced the profound intimacy of really knowing yourself, surface-level connection feels like starvation. Jung said the unconscious always seeks consciousness, and she's found it within herself. Now she can only share her life with someone who's found it too, not someone who's pretending, not someone who's aspiring, but someone who's actually done the work. That person exists. She believes that. But she also knows they're rare, because individuation is rare, because psychological sovereignty is rare, because most people would rather stay comfortable in their patterns than face the fire of transformation. And she's okay with that, really okay. Not in a bitter, defensive way, but in the peaceful acceptance of someone who's learned that you can't want consciousness for someone else, they have to want it for themselves. So she waits. Not passively, she lives, she creates, she expands. She deepens her relationship with herself, with her work, with the mystery of existence. And if someone shows up who can match her depth, her presence, her unwillingness to perform, she'll recognize them immediately. Not because they'll be perfect, but because they'll be real, conscious, awake. And when two awakened people meet, Jung said, that's when the real work begins. Not the work of fixing or completing, but the alchemical work of transformation, where both are changed by the contact, where both expand into new territories of being. She's ready for that, finally actually ready. Not the desperate readiness of someone needing rescue, but the sovereign readiness of someone who's already rescued herself, and now has something real to offer. That's the paradox no one tells you. The journey of learning to be alone is actually the preparation for learning to truly be together. And she's done her preparation. The question now is, has anyone else? So let's talk about what's actually happening when you encounter a woman like this. When you feel that strange pull, admiration mixed with discomfort, fascination mixed with judgment, recognition mixed with resistance. Carl Jung would tell you exactly what's happening. You're seeing your own unlived life staring back at you. Every strong reaction you have to another person is a projection, the parts of yourself you haven't integrated, the aspects of your psyche you've rejected, the roads you didn't take. She's not doing anything to you, she's just being, and her being activates something in you that desperately needs your attention. If you're a man who feels threatened by her independence, look deeper. What aspect of your own masculinity depends on female need? What part of your identity crumbles if women don't require your strength, your provision, your validation? That's not about her. That's your unlived power, demanding to be reclaimed from the projections you've been making your entire life. If you're a woman who feels judged by her choices, look deeper still. What dreams did you abandon to be acceptable? What parts of yourself did you silence to be chosen? What version of your life are you living out of fear rather than truth? She's not judging you. She's reflecting what you've been afraid to face. And if you're drawn to her story with a recognition that feels like remembering rather than learning, you already know what that means. Something in you is ready to stop performing, ready to stop fragmenting yourself for approval, ready to descend into your own underworld and retrieve what you left behind in the name of being loved. This is the psychological crisis Jung said we all eventually face. Do we continue living the life others expect, or do we risk everything to become who we actually are? Most people never make that choice consciously. They stay in the persona. They keep performing. They medicate the quiet desperation with distraction, achievement, substances, drama, anything to avoid the confrontation with their own unlived life. But some people hit the threshold where the persona becomes unbearable, where the mask starts suffocating them, where the cost of staying asleep exceeds the terror of waking up. That's the moment she reached. And that might be the moment you're reaching now. You can feel it, can't you? That restlessness, that sense that you're living someone else's script, that knowing that the relationship you're in, or desperately seeking, is just another way to avoid facing yourself. Jung said the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents. But the greatest burden you bear is your own unlived life. Every choice you didn't make, every truth you didn't speak, every time you shrank to fit, every moment you betrayed yourself to belong. That burden doesn't disappear, it accumulates. It becomes symptoms, anxiety, depression, chronic dissatisfaction, the sense that something's wrong but you can't name what, relationships that repeat the same patterns, the feeling of being stuck in a life that looks right but feels empty. These aren't problems to be solved with better coping strategies. They're messages from your unconscious, your psyche screaming that you're living a lie, and the volume keeps increasing until you finally listen. She listened. That's the only difference between her and everyone still performing. She listened to the anxiety and asked what it was protecting her from feeling. She listened to the depression and recognized it as suppressed life force. She listened to the dissatisfaction and understood it as her soul's refusal to accept imitation life. And when she listened, really listened, everything changed. Not because she found answers, because she found the courage to live the questions, to not know, to not have it figured out, to walk into the unknown without a map, a partner, or a guarantee of success. That's what individuation requires. Not 7 steps to self-actualization, not a blueprint for happiness, but the willingness to become psychologically homeless for a while, to lose yourself completely, so you can find yourself truly. Most people won't do it, and that's not a judgment, it's an observation. The pull of the collective is strong, the pressure to conform is relentless. The terror of being alone, unwanted, misunderstood is real. But some people reach the point where staying hurts more than leaving, where pretending is more painful than truth, where losing yourself is scarier than losing everyone else. If you're reading this and something inside you is breaking open, that's your moment. Not tomorrow, not after you finish this relationship, this degree, this goal. Now, this is the call to descent. You can ignore it, most people do. You can rationalize it away, medicate it, project it onto your circumstances. You can keep believing that the right relationship will fix everything, that the next achievement will make you feel whole, that changing your external reality will heal your internal fragmentation. Or you can do what she did, turn toward the void, face the shadow, descend into your own underworld, and refuse to come back up until you've gathered every piece of yourself you left behind. It won't be comfortable. Jung never promised comfort. He promised wholeness, and wholeness comes through confrontation, not bypass, through integration, not transcendence, through facing what you've been running from since childhood. The woman who lives alone isn't special. She's not superhuman. She's not exempt from loneliness, doubt, or fear. She just decided those things were worth facing if it meant she could finally stop lying to herself. You can make that decision too, right now, this moment. Not to live alone necessarily. That's not the point, but to live truthfully, to stop accepting relationships that require you to perform, to stop seeking completion through another person, to stop betraying yourself for belonging. Jung said the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But he also said the price of that privilege is giving up who you pretended to be, and everyone you convinced to believe in that pretense. She paid that price. The question is, are you ready to pay it too? Because once you see the mirror she's holding up, you can't unsee it. Once you recognize your own face in her story, you can't pretend you don't. Once you know that wholeness is possible, settling for fragments becomes unbearable. This is the moment of choice, the threshold, the point of no return. And deep down, beneath all the fear and resistance, you already know what you're going to choose. You've always known. You're just finally ready to admit it. So you understand now, wholeness doesn't come from finding the right person. It comes from facing yourself. But here's what Jung discovered about women who've done this work and still keep choosing men who can't choose them back. It's not about bad luck. It's about an unconscious pattern you're repeating until you finally see it. Watch this next.